So you're building a mobile app, you're going to need to know about these 7 databases in order to be able to build your app in a way that a lot of people can use. So for each database, we're going to go over what problem does it solve, how does it work, what does data look like, some example use cases, and then some example databases to maybe point you guys in a direction where you can go and look up more for yourself. The first one where I want to take a look at is relational databases. Now, this is probably one that you already know about, and in fact, you probably should already know about it. It is kind of a catch-all for anything that you've got to do, and the data model has actually really stood the test of time. It was originally created to kind of mimic like more businessy type of things like transactions that use tabular, so rows and columns type data. So business transactions, HR software, keeping track of stock in a warehouse, things like that. It has also been very easy to adapt it to just about any problem out there, which has what's been really kind of kept it, a relevant thing all these years, because it actually was created like back in the 60s. And the first database came out like in the 70s. So it's really been relevant for a really, really long time. Now, you might see people that recommend, hey, just go with Postgres, just go with a relational or a SQL database. And for most cases, like 9 out of 10 cases, this is true. This is going to be your best bet. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't edge cases or specific things that relational databases maybe aren't the best for. And we're definitely going to talk about them in this video. But I just want to point out that like 9 out of 10 times, this is going to be your best bet, and it's going to be able to solve your problem and kind of be with you for the long term. I once had a former manager tell me that you should be able to apply your data to a relational data model. And if you can't, that probably means that you don't understand your data well enough. So far, this has been pretty true, as painful as it is to admit it, because I'm a little bit of a stubborn person sometimes. But this has been pretty true. There are, like I mentioned, some exceptions to this, but generally speaking, this has stood up. Now, the basic idea is that you use tables with multiple columns to represent business objects or an object type in your database. So let's say you have a person, and the person has a first name, a last name, an email, and maybe their birth date. So you would have a table. Think of an Excel spreadsheet with a column for name, a column for last name, a column for email, and a column for birth date. And that would be your users table. And then you might create, let's say, another table for a blog or for a post in a blog. And that table might have title, content, things like that. And then you use what are called foreign keys to relate those tables to one another to kind of show where the relationships are going. We will talk about a database that actually excels or was really made for dealing with relationships. It's a little weird that this type of a database is called a relational model, because as you create more and more relations and as you have to traverse more and more relations to get to the data that you want, your database can slow down when it is at scale, but it typically works pretty well and you can still do a lot, even though, again, we'll get to something later on in the video that is actually purpose built for that exact use case. Now, one thing that is nice about a relational database is that it forces you to adhere to a specific schema, which means that your front end won't really have to accommodate too much from the back end not having certain pieces of data, because all documents or all pieces of data that you put in will have or will adhere to that structure that you have predetermined. This does mean that you have to do data migrations or schema model migrations every time you want to add data or add a column or whatever, and that can definitely be a bit of a headache sometimes. But overall, I would say that it's pretty worth it to be able to have that strict structure adherence within your applications. Something else is that these databases all use SQL, which is a structured query language. It's the language that they all use to be able to work with data, so query it, manipulate it. It's a very, very well understood language, and you won't have trouble finding support for it. Something that people don't often realize is that there are different flavors of SQL, so different databases have their own flavor of SQL. And generally speaking, they're all quite similar, but there are subtle nuances that I have found over the years that sometimes people don't really pay attention to or don't even realize are there. So like I said, you can really adapt this to any type of data that you need to, but some example use cases would be a blog, a marketplace, e-commerce store, HR software, social media, business management software, financial website, or apps. So pretty wide array of things that you can use this for. And a lot of the databases, like in particular Postgres, which was the one that I use, that actually has a lot of plugins that you can get that can allow you to do a lot of the stuff that these other databases allow you to do. I don't know that in that case, in like the case of using plugins, you're going to get the exact same benefits that other databases that are purpose built for those problems that we'll discuss in a little bit are meant for, but still it's nice to know that you can still use SQL, or you can still use a relational database to be able to accomplish those things. So some examples of these types of databases would be Oracle. That's actually the first database that I used professionally was Oracle at the first job I had. Microsoft SQL Server, Postgres, MySQL, and MariaDB. So the next type of database I want to talk about are called key value stores. And these databases are really there when you have a very simple data model and a very simple access pattern. There's no joins, there's no relations, nothing like that. It's very simple data. You can kind of think of it as like a JSON object almost, where how you have different keys and then each key has a value associated with it. And the keys have to all be unique, and that's how you find the value that you're looking for. These databases can be great because they offer a very high amount of throughput, which if you need speed above all else can be really, really great. And just the simplicity of them also is very helpful and can really be beneficial if you don't need all of the bells and whistles or all of the querying capabilities of something like SQL. Now, this type of a database is more of a use case specific thing, but when you do need something that's a lot simpler, it can be pretty nice to just kind of toss this in there and you're off to the races. It's pretty easy and straightforward. Now, also note that each database will have its own kind of query language or its own DSL. And so it's not like you can kind of learn one thing like with SQL and then you can be good for a lot of different databases. I believe that most of them have their own thing. Maybe some of them have kind of come out with adapters to be able to use SQL. Like a lot of NoSQL databases have implement these adapters to be able to use SQL since it's such a widely understood and known language. But typically, with any NoSQL database, you're going to be using whatever query language that database provides you. Some examples of when you'd maybe want to use a key value store: session storage for websites, caching, real-time data processing, using user recommendation list, and maybe session storage for a more specific thing such as online multiplayer games. And some examples of databases that fit into this category would be Redis, DynamoDB, and Memcached. So the next one that I want to talk to you guys about are document databases. Document databases are used a lot of times instead of relational databases because they allow for a lot of the same richness in data that you can put in. And a lot of them even have or try to have a lot of the same concepts in terms of querying, such as joins. Like in MongoDB, I believe you can do joins. But generally speaking, what I really have always loved about document databases, by the way, a lot of people when they're learning to code, if they start off with like a boot camp, a lot of the boot camps I've seen or a lot of the online courses that I've seen will actually offer, they will teach you how to use a NoSQL database, like a document database specifically. And I've seen MongoDB used very often to fill the place or the role of the database. So a lot of them will do that, which I find kind of interesting. Now, what's also kind of nice is that document databases allow a greater level of flexibility than their relational database counterparts. And the reason is because there's no set schema that you have to structure your data according to. Especially when you're starting off with a new project, you aren't going to know all of the data that is required in that project. You might actually have multiple iterations with your data model before you actually settle on something that you want to use when you release that website or that app into production using that database. And so what's kind of nice about the document model is that you have a lot of really, really rich ability to query for things and to structure things in various different ways and to capture a lot of really amazing data. And you don't have to adhere to a strict data model. Now, this is not without its cons. In fact, as much of a pro as that might seem, a lot of conventional wisdom will say if you're doing that, if that's the reason you're using a document data model, to actually not use it in the first place. You should deal with the reality of needing to migrate your data and just go for the relational data model, because ultimately you're going to have to move over from the document data model into the relational model. And that's going to actually cause a lot more headaches than it would be if you just did it to start off with. But nevertheless, it is something that you could do. And I've personally done it before with Dev Cafe. I'm actually doing it. And I think as long as you design your data in such a way that can be easily migrated, it's totally fine. So some examples of when you might want to use a document data model would be for a marketplace, e-commerce website or app, social media, content management, real-time data potentially. And examples of these databases are MongoDB, DynamoDB, which we already mentioned once, and Firestore, which is again actually the one that I've chosen to use at the moment for Dev Cafe. Those Well, document and relational, I think, are probably more well known. Maybe a key value store like Redis is known a little bit, or maybe DynamoDB is known quite a bit. But I think now we get into this area where they're lesser known databases. And so the one that I want to bring up is called a graph database. It uses a graph data model, right? Um, I've used one before in production at a previous job, and it was incredible. I really loved it. If you have the correct use case for it, it's really great. So this is a bit more use case specific. You wouldn't want to use this as your main database. People will often explain it this way. You should use a graph database when you care as much about the relationships between data objects as you do the data objects themselves. And I think it's like, it makes sense if you kind of have some background. It's a bit maybe abstract. And so I want to give an example. Let's say that we're going to build a recommendation engine for a new movies website that we're building. Let's say it's Netflix, maybe, right? We're building Netflix. We want to be able to recommend movies to people when they sign up for a new account. And so we're going to build a recommendation engine. And what we're going to do is we're going to have some sort of an onboarding page, and we're going to ask them, what's your favorite genre? What are some of your other favorite movies? Things like that. Some basic onboarding questions. And then when they complete that, we want to be able to give them a list of recommended movies. But at that point, we only know how they answered those questions. We don't know anything about anything that they've previously watched necessarily, unless maybe one of our questions was asking them. But we don't know what movies or TV shows they've previously watched, and we don't know how they've interacted with those movies. Like maybe they watched a movie, but they only watched half of it, and then they never came back to it. And that says something about how they felt about that movie. So what we might be able to do is go ahead and look at, well, how did they answer these questions, and how did other people answer those questions? And the people who we already have data on who answered the questions in a similar way to this new user, let's go and look at what movies they like and what movies we recommend to them. And maybe we can go and start off with those recommendations for this new user, because that's the only piece of data we have so far, are how they answered those onboarding questions. And so a graph database is a really, really good backbone for building something like this. Now, could you build something like that with a relational database, or maybe even a document database? Yes, you definitely could. But are they going to be the right things for this data? No, they're not going to be, because this type of database, a graph database, is specifically built to prioritize the relationships between pieces of data as opposed to just the data itself. So we might store all of the user's data inside of our relational database and then only store the relationships. We just store, let's say, a node for that one user. And then we have, let's say, different relationships showing how they connect to other pieces of data in the system. And the underlying data for each node still lives inside of our relational data model, but we just kind of store it. We only rely on the graph database just for the relationships between the underlying pieces of data, if that makes sense. So some use cases for this type of database, a graph database, specifically are fraud detection, recommendation engines, social networks. Let's say like you want to model who follows who and stuff like that. Knowledge bases, network monitoring, and AI actually, which is kind of cool. And then some example databases that fall into this category are Neo4j. That's the one that I used, and I had a really good experience with it. OrangoDB, Amazon Neptune, we almost used that one and decided not to. dgraph, that was another one that we looked into using and decided not to. And then Azure's Cosmos DB, which I've never used. Next up are in-memory databases, and this is really useful more or less just when I/O is the bottleneck. So if you're having to deal with, the performance, the I/O performance of a more typical database such as, let's say, Postgres or some document database like MongoDB, and it's a little slow for you, it could come down to I/O, because I/O is pretty costly in terms of performance. And so in-memory databases basically store everything in the memory on the machine, which makes their retrieval a lot faster. So all of the data gets stored in the memory, and that way you can access it much faster. Now, the problem with this is that memory is volatile. So if the service has to be restarted, if the machine crashes, if any of that stuff kind of happens, you lose that data. Really, the benefit and the use case there is when you need to optimize for speed and performance over anything else. Example use cases for this type of a database would be a data cache, real-time apps, gaming leaderboards, and session management. And some example databases are Memcached, Redis, and SQLite also has an in-memory option. The next one I want to talk about are time series databases. So time series databases are pretty similar to a relational database. It's still tabular, or at least it can be. But what's happening is that you're optimizing for the timestamp on each piece of data that you put in, and that's what gets indexed off of, right? And the database is going to prioritize the timestamp and keeping them in order as it inserts them into the database. Whereas for a relational database or any other kind of database, it doesn't really prioritize time as much. These databases are also really good at being able to work with vast amounts of time-sensitive data. So for example, some use cases would be financial market analysis, IoT sensor data storage, real-time network monitoring, and log analysis. In all of those cases, time is the key thing that kind of creates them, together, unified together. And you want to make sure that you get all of those things in the right order of time because you're trying to analyze things over time, right? You're trying to store things as they exist over time. And so time becomes the most important thing there. And these databases are optimized to kind of work with that. So some example databases in this category would be InfluxDB, Prometheus, and Timescale. Okay, text search. Let's say that for whatever reason you want to build a new email client, even though email clients are they exist everywhere and Gmail is pretty solid, but whatever. So let's say you want to build a new email client and you want it to compete with Gmail, and you realize that one of the features that you're going to need is the ability to search across all of the contents of all of the emails that the person has to be able to help them find things a lot faster. You could do that with a normal database, sort of, and it would be a bit of a pain. It would be pretty hard. But what would make more sense to do is if you had a database that was specifically made to work with text. And that's exactly what text search databases do. So basically, they store the data according to a different index. They index it differently. I believe it's called a reverse index. And so they basically store each word and then all of the documents where that word is found. And so when you go and type in a word, they're able to tell you, here's all the documents that we found this word in. And as your query gets longer, they're actually able to then also give you some sort of a relevancy score to say, all of these words that you typed in, we found them in all of these documents, or maybe the phrase that you typed in, we found it in these documents, or however, I think they all kind of work differently internally, but it's able to give you as well some relevancy score. Again, this is one of those databases that you're not going to use as a primary database like Postgres or any relational database for that matter, or maybe a document database. You're going to use it as a complement to the main database to be able to provide a certain feature, like in this case, searching across the contents of all of your emails. So some example use cases would be web search engines, content management systems, e-commerce platforms, and document management systems. Actually, the first company that I worked for was a document management company, and we actually used full text search. I think we used Elasticsearch to be able to provide our customers with the full text search capability. Speaking of Elasticsearch, some example databases that fall into this category would be Elasticsearch, Postgres. So Postgres, Postgres is a relational database, but this is another one of those examples where Postgres allows you to use plugins that can kind of expand the capability of what it's able to do. And it has a lot of plugins like this that allow you to do that. It's a very, very well-supported database that allows you to do this type of stuff. So Postgres is one that you could use. And then also TypeSense, which is, I believe, an open source option. So that is also really great because I think Elasticsearch you might have to pay for. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care. See ya.